Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ben Berger. We don't get to see him very often here in Logan because he's our lone geologist by himself at our Uintah Basin campus of USU. So Ben, welcome to the big city. While you're up here. Ben is originally from Colorado, and in fact he got his PhD at the University of Colorado Boulder in paleontology. And soon after that, he came here to work with us in Vernal, and he's been here for going on 6 years now. So in that time, Ben has been exploring the wild deserts of the Rocky Mountain basins, searching for fossil treasures, yeah. All the while wearing his fedora hat. And so in this way, we like to think of Ben as the Indiana Jones of Vernal, Utah. Ben also does a lot of teaching with all of his classes delivered through distance technology and online. And so he's a real leader in incorporating technology into his teaching. And so I want to mention very quickly, Ben has a YouTube channel of his own that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos that he incorporates into his instruction. But you should all go check it out. I think Ben will mention this a bit later. In almost all of these videos, Ben is wearing a fedora, and he is completely geeking out about fossils and rocks. And so that's super fun. All right, so help me to welcome Dr. Ben Berger.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin Berger, and I'm pleased to present to you this evening on my research on monsters, as well as important information for those of you in the audience that study monsters yourselves and are interested in their creation from the imagination. I also want to thank the organizers of the Science Unwrapped lecture series and the kind invitation to allow me to speak to you tonight. So, for the last 7 years, I've been searching for a hideous monster, a monstrous beast in the windswept badlands of eastern Utah. Some years back, while I was returning from a geological survey in the heart of the Uintah Basin, I stumbled upon clusters of cracked and broken bones. These are embedded in a thin limestone layer that were petrified within the rock. Now, these fossilized bones represent the remains of digested meals of this monstrous creature. I collected these samples of this petrified excrement and picked through the bones back in the lab. I identified the remains of early tapirs, rhinoceroses, horses, camels, and other large prey items that this savage beast fed upon. Now, the remains of this beast itself are very rare, with the first specimens and knowledge of its existence from the early expedition into Utah in 1877, led by a team of scientists from Yale Peabody Museum, led by their legendary founder, O.C. Marsh. He's the guy with the beard in the back there. Now, the first specimen of this monster was a single jaw, which lay in the Peabody Museum undescribed until 1923, when Malcolm Rutherford Thorup described this large jaw. The lower jaw is a dennary, preserving two of the colossal lower molars. They're sharp, and they're projecting backward like slicing hooks. The teeth identify this creature as a meat eater, which, when compared to the largest specimens of a male African lion in the collection, were slightly larger. The scientific name given to this beast is Harpagalestes, which means in Greek the hooked thief, attributed to its hook-shaped slicing and sharp molars. Now, calcaneum, or ankle bone, was also attributed to the creature, which was stockier than a lion, with heavier and stronger bones than any living carnivorous beast. Professor W.B. Scott of Princeton, he's the one with the glasses there, the was eager for adventure in the western states, and his good friend, Professor Henry Osborn, he's got the rifle there. He's one of the founders of the esteemed American Museum of Natural History in New York. They journeyed into the Badlands of northeastern Utah in the 1880s, and they discovered few isolated teeth of this creature. Now, knowing that there must be more of this monster, Henry Osborn became sort of obsessed with its discovery, and he sent a well-known scientist, Mr. Olaf Peterson, who, after some struggles to gain access to parts of eastern Utah, negotiated permission from the local Ute Indian tribe, and with the support of Major Randelette from Fort Duchesne, traveled into the isolated Badlands along the White River. Then, in 1894, he discovered a magnificent skull of this creature. It's an older individual of Harpagalestes. The skull was sent back to New York City, and it was featured the following year in a quickly written paper by Professor Osborn. Now, the skull has received a full redescription by Professor Maureen O'Leary 100 years later, and its large size had many in the scientific community certain as to its affinity to whales and other gigantic mammals. But after much study, she concluded that the beast represented a unique land predator unrelated to any living form of carnivorous creature. So this is an artistic reconstruction of this mysterious beast, Harpagalestes, and it's based on only these scattered remains that I've described. So as many of you already know from my research, I'm a paleontologist, and paleontology is the study of ancient creatures and organisms from long ago, and as you might have surmised, Harpagalestes is a creature that's only known from its fossilized remains, having vanished from the Earth 40 million years ago. Part of my job as a paleontologist is to reconstruct the past by detailed study of the anatomy and scientific evidence left in the fragmentary record of fossils found here in Utah. Now, over the years, I've realized that my knowledge would serve well to those of you who create monsters for fiction and for entertainment. Having knowledge of the anatomy, motion, and nature of living creatures will aid any artist in their rendition of a more believable and lifelike monster. So tonight, I'm going to present a quick introductory lesson on how to make better monsters. So the next time you see a movie with a scary monster in it, you'll understand their creation from both the imagination and the real anatomy of living and extinct creatures. So the first step we're going to talk about is the mouth and the gut tube. Now, I've included the gut tube in our discussion on how your monster will sustain itself, as a mouth is actually optional. And the gut tube may instead be an invagination of a monster that consumes its prey. And what I'm talking about is how some of the earliest animals fed, by wrapping their tissue around their victim and digesting them externally. This is how cnidarians, like jellyfish and corals, feed. And this works well if the victim does not squirm away. So to prevent escape, many cnidarians use poisonous barbs or tentacles that they shoot out and sting the prey, and this paralyzes them. And then they wind it slowly back into this invagination or fold of tissue in order to consume and digest this hapless victim. Because these living creatures lack a skeleton, they're restricted to the water. Although monster makers have used these types of creatures as blobs or oozing slime monsters that are amorphous. So authors such as R.L. Stine and the famous 1958 movie, The Blob, imagined such creatures. But it's teeth and a mouth that can add greater fear, especially if those teeth are useful for eating of flesh. Now, invertebrates, that is those creatures that lack a spine, exhibit a gut tube, a digestive tract that forms from this invagination early in the embryo. And there's two forms of invertebrates that exist, the protostomes and the deutostromes. Now, among the protostomes are the annelids. the segmented worms, and leeches. These creatures move by the process of peristalsis, basically by the contraction and expansion of their body segments. But what makes leeches so much more terrifying is when they feed on us as parasites. The mouth of leeches is a ring of 3 hook-like jaws with tiny teeth that cut into the flesh and allow the blood to pool under the sucker. This is capable of drawing blood and feeding like a vampire in your own skin. Now, just the thought of something cold and slimy wiggling across your skin can make you shiver and itch with that hooked mouth. But now imagine it wiggling in your sensitive bits, in your eye, up your nose, or into your ear canal. Well, you're sure to freak out a little bit more. There's actually been some discoveries of new species of leeches in kids' noses, so pretty cool. A number of protostomes also make excellent monsters, in particular those groups that emerged from the water to conquer the land before our own fishy ancestors stumbled out of the water millions of years later. These are the insects and arachnids, animals that maintain an external skeleton and protective layer of tough chitin armor. Now, strangely enough, it's the arachnids, or the spiders, that tend to make it into many monster movies and literary fiction, such as J.K. Rowling and J.R.R. Tolkien, and they're often simply enlarging the body without much adjustment to the overall body plan. Now, the insect world sponsors this rich source of thousands of wonderful monsters just by enlarging their size. And the fear of spiders, arachnophobia, is one of the most common fears that we have. Now, one factor to their frightful appearance is the complexity of their mouths, which often open side to side like an automatic door, but are also ringed by appendages that push food or prey into the opening. So I could go on with various invertebrates as excellent sources of material for unique monsters, but I wanted to talk about my own expertise in bony-spined creatures, the vertebrates. Vertebrates include animals that exhibit an internal skeleton, which features a row of ossified vertebrae that extend down the axis of the creature. Although there are a number of early groups which have very flexible notochords that provide a rod or an axis of the body, some of these early vertebrates, which there are a couple living groups, have kind of terrifying mouths. They're collectively referred to as agnatha, a word that means without a jaw. This includes in this group the lamprey, a parasitic fish that uses its sucker mouth to feed on the flesh of larger fish and drink the blood out of the wound. But I think perhaps it is the hagfish are perhaps the more terrifying. These are the scavengers feeding on dead that sink into the darkest depths of the ocean, and they're often seen around the decaying corpse of a whale. But they have a ringed mouth without a jaw, but a tangle of sharp teeth that grip and twist off flesh. Hagfish are also one of the most vile producers of slime. So slime is used to protect the animal from predation by larger fish, and slime is one of the ooziest and grossest things that you can add to any monster, as it adds to the disgusting factor. But in nature, slime is really useful. It keeps animals from getting eaten. And just like a tough, hard shell on a turtle, slime is a very protective device. Now, jaws are unique, and I want to spend some little time examining the marvel of having them. There is an enormous variety of jaws. Now, the simplest jaw is similar to the one we have. It's a single joint. I'll grab my right there, the temporomandibular joint, and we have really a boring jaw. When we compare a jaw to that of fishes and sharks, some of the most terrifying monsters of the seas are sharks, and part of that comes from the unique and specialized anatomy of their jaws. hence the name of the famous horror movie Jaws and its sequels. The jaw on sharks is hinge joint that's formed from 3 cartilaginous ossification centers. And the skull of the shark is a cartilaginous chondrocranium, which encases the brain, as well as provide a socket or orbit for each of the eyeballs. The upper jaw is loosely connected to this chondrocranium via a joint with the cartilaginous plato quadrate, which is in yellow, which hinges with the lower jaw made up by Meckel's cartilage, named after the famous German anatomist Johann Friedrich Meckel, who's also well known for his early study of birth defects. As this Meckel's cartilage is an embryological precursor to our own lower jawbone, the mandible. But what makes sharks' jaws frightening is this third cartilaginous ossification center, which is in pink here, which in many sharks is composed of 3 parts, the basal hyoid, the ceratohyoid, and the important hyomandibular, which attaches loosely to the chondrocranium. This hyomandibular acts as a fulcrum, which thrusts the entire jaw forward anteriorly. And this gives the effect of literally extending the jaws out of the mouth. So in 1975 movie Jaws, this was an important part of the construction of Bruce. There's Bruce, which is a mechanical monster constructed for the film by art director Joe Ives. Now, the animation studio Pixar used the unique mechanics of shark jaws in their own sharks in the movie Finding Nemo. And I want you to notice how realistic they're moving that upper jaw up and down. This is Shark, the character's named Bruce, after the Jaws monster, anatomic monster. Now, bony fish, which arose millions of years ago in the late Paleozoic era, have evolved a number or series of complex moving parts in the operation of their jaws. One particular group, called the teleos fish, arose in the Mesozoic era, and they became the dominant group of living fish today, in part because of their unique jaw mechanics. In this case, bones rather than cartilage became the framework of these mouths, which involve the motion of the maxilla, the upper jawbone, and you can see the maxilla here in red. It swivels kind of downward, and this basically enlarges the mouth. This is what make goldfish have these very sort of pucker lips, fish lips, when they're feeding. But what inspires monster makers about the teleos fish is that they also grow teeth in strange places, not only along their jawbones, but on the tongue and roof of the mouth, and even in the throat. Some teleos, including the Lepiomorpha group, the eels, and a fish that you might be familiar with in the cichlid family, such as tilapia, that you might have eaten for dinner, maybe, have something special in the throat. They have pharyngeal jaws. Pharyngeal jaws are a second set of jaws containing sharp teeth deep down in the throat. And they're used to pull prey down into the esophagus more effectively than having a single set of jaws. Now, these pharyngeal jaws are found in some teleos fish, where the inspiration behind H.R. Giger's art in the movie Alien, for which he won an Academy Award. And so in the movie, you guys might remember this, there's a second set of jaws that extends out of the open mouth of one of the scary scenes with Sigourney Weaver. And besides the scene of the alien popping out of the chest as a parasite, the idea of adding pharyngeal jaws to the alien added to its scary factor. And then being based actually on living animals makes it so much more believable. So there's so much that can be done with jaws by understanding their complex anatomy, of especially teleos fish, and their complexity of feeding patterns that could be extended to monsters that live on land. Now, one of the interesting anatomical additions that can be added to monsters is something called craniokinesis. Craniokinesis is the motion of cranial bones in the skull during feeding, or it could be speaking of the monster. In mammals, a single bone of the lower jaw is hinged to the skull with a single joint. But something to consider when making puppets or anatomic movement of monsters is that many birds and reptiles, there are actually a number of joints in the skull that move independently when the animal opens and closes their mouth. In birds, such as parrots, the maxilla bone involves a joint with the skull to allow sort of a back and forth movement that you can see there. And this basically moves the upper jaw or the beak kind of out and up independently. Now, some mammals, like rabbits, have secondarily developed a joint in the base of cranium to move during hopping as to keep the eyes from bouncing around as much, so like shock absorbers in the back of the skull. But probably the most amazing and extensive craniokinesis is found in reptiles. Reptiles, such as snakes, have multiple bones in the lower jaw with the dentary as the tooth-bearing bone. And the angular and articular bones can form additional joints in the lower jaw to help open the mouth further than a traditional jaw. A joint between the dentary and angular and articular bones is found in mosasaurs. These are the aquatic marine reptiles that lived during the age of dinosaurs. This extra joint allowed them to open their mouths to capture prey, sometimes as big as the reptile itself. Now, the same joint is found in snakes, although snakes have an extremely mobile skull as well, as the paired left and right dentary bones can pull apart. You see them pulled apart there at the symphysis during feeding. And this allows snakes to swallow huge prey items. So knowing where these joints are within the skull of any monster that you make can add some really freaky, weird effects to your creature. Now, teeth are perhaps the most important aspect of a monster. The pointier, the better. And this is because teeth that are sharp are more useful for eating meat than flat teeth, which is useful for chewing and grinding food like grass, fruits, and nuts. Sharp teeth instantly identify a creature as a danger. And it's amazing how just putting big sharp teeth on a teddy bear will make them more frightening. This is the skull of Laviton. It's a prehistoric mammal from the Miocene of Peru. It lived about 12 million years ago. And it has rows and rows of conical teeth. And it was a climax predator in the oceans. The skull measures 3 meters in length. And large pointy teeth such as these are often found in animals that feed on other animals in the water. And they tend to be identical along the tooth row, and they're useful to puncture the prey, but they're not very useful for chewing or cutting up the prey. So to aid in chewing flesh, some predators, like Tyrannosaurus rex, have serrated teeth. These are also including in sharks have serrated teeth as well. But also these carnivorous dinosaurs. Now, in dinosaurs, the serrations work much like a steak knife in cutting meat. So we can see this in the teeth of large predatory dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. Their serrations are along the posterior edge, and they act to extend the cutting of flesh like a knife or a saw with the opening and closing of the mouth, which is useful for cutting through tough tendons. Now, one aspect that's particularly evident in the teeth of Velociraptor, which is right here, is that they have recurved sort of slightly backward. And a similar curve is found in snakes, and that, like barbs on a hook, help hold the struggling prey. Several mammals actually also have serrated teeth as well, such as the prehistoric carnivore Arctocyon mammoth, a beast that lived during the Paleocene, and specimens I found in Colorado. During the Eocene in Utah, there was a predatory crocodile called Pristochampsis, which had teeth like dinosaurs and moved about on land, eating like early rhinos. And carnivorous mammals also have developed carnassial teeth, which act like scissors, which can cut tendons or stringy muscle tissue more easily. Now, there's another toothy thing that predatory dinosaurs don't have, and it's something often found in more mammalian monsters, and those are fangs. Fangs are large canines, and canines in mammals sit between the spatulate incisors and bulbous premolars and molars. Now, long fangs, or saber teeth, have evolved multiple times in mammalian evolution, including in marsupials, such as Thylacolus, the Eocene creodont from Wyoming, Macacrones, the Nimravid Hopiaflonus from the late Eocene and early Oligocene of Colorado, and the true saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, from the Pleistocene of North America. Now, fangs are interesting because within primates, which is our own order of mammals, males tend to have larger canines than females. And canines is actually a sexually dimorphic trait, and forensic anthropologists can sex skulls based on canine size with about 87% accuracy, not the greatest, but I can usually sex them, 80% accuracy. In fact, large fangs may be important in signaling fitness to mates and overall attractiveness in many primate groups. Hence the heartthrob fascination with vampire teeth. So vampires are a whole genre of monsters that are both terrifying but also attractive and captivating, hence the popularity of vampire fiction. Large fangs are seen as a male trait, and large fangs are also found extending back into the early evolution of mammals, with the earliest synapsid mammals during the Triassic and Permian periods, around the time dinosaurs were first evolving. So large canines have been a mammalian trait for a very long time. Now, one important aspect of adding fangs to your monster is to make sure that they are indeed canines and not incisors, which will make your monster look kind of buck-toothed. Fangs are also useful for carrying venom, like in snakes, or used, for example, in vampire bats to suck blood. So the canines can be hollow or grooved, like that found in living venomous animals that inject poison into their victims with a bite. All right. I'm going to talk about, in computer animation, there are some things that can make monsters look very fake. So this is from the movie Lake Placid, which I think is one of the worst monster movies there is. And the reason is that, first, there's really poor lighting that you can see. So there's a mismatch in the lighting with the background. And the second is a misunderstanding how animals move. So it's often getting the motion correct. Animation artists oftentimes will use moving people, sometimes against a green screen, to map out key points of movement on an actor. And this is very helpful, for example, in the rendition of Gollum in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. However, if we want to make more complex monsters move around, we need to understand the principles of animal locomotion. So the first land animals moved by shortening their muscles like in arthropods, which have an external skeleton, and the muscles move hidden underneath their skeleton. But note that these animals will have to molt their skeleton every once in a while as they grow and go through different molts. And as they go through different molts, they're going to change their appearance, which is really cool if you're a monster maker, right? Now, echinoderms, which include starfish and sea cucumbers, movement is achieved by hydraulic pressure. This is similar to the way in which machines like bulldozers work, by pushing fluid into a chamber or foot to expand it, and then evacuating the fluid to compress the foot. And this generates a pressure gradient, and this facilitates motion. Now, I've not actually seen this very often used in monster movies, but it could be a really interesting avenue for future monster makers. Now, if we want to make, for example, a dragon, which we would imagine would have an internal skeleton, we need to understand how muscles act on the underlying skeleton of the dragon. Muscles can only pull, that is, they can only shorten the distance between two attachment sites on the bones, and they almost always cross one or two joints. By shortening the muscle tissue, the bones flex or extend. When muscle is shortened, they also widen or bulge, which you can see on the flesh of the monster when they flex their joints. So often animators will start with a skeleton. They'll add muscles to it, And then finally, they'll add the skin over the monster. This helps the artist to think about how large or small the muscle bulges around the monster should be and how that muscle tissue will behave with movement. So I want to give a quick example about how understanding the underlying muscle arrangements can make better monsters. So this is Stuart Schmid, who is a paleontologist who teaches in San Bernardino. And he was consulted on the DreamWorks movie series, How to Train Your Dragon. So when he was shown like early drafts of the animated dragons, which is right here, right there, there was something just kind of not right. And he realized right away what the problem was. The dragon's tails had kind of just been stuck on to their bodies. Now, in mammals, tails don't carry with them a large set of muscles. And birds, of course, lack a really bony tail. So the animators were just adding tails without muscles. But in dinosaurs, and presumably dragons, and this is a crocodile over here, the muscles in the tail serve an important role in locomotion. So in dinosaurs, there's this large set of muscles called the cauda femoris, which, as their name suggests, runs from the femur, the thigh bone, to the tail vertebrae. And when they contract or shorten, the femur is pulled backward. And this moves the body of the dinosaur forward. So Dr. Schmid had the animators add larger, more bulkier tails. And in so doing so, the dragons became a little bit more realistic, although at the same time they preserved the fantastical nature of the various artists' imaginations of weird and whimsical dragons. So having a clear picture of the underlying skeleton and muscles of monsters is the key to making it more believable. But a lot more fun can be had by skinning your monster with integument. So I'm going to talk about different types of skin that you can put on your monster. So if we're using living and fossil animals as analogs for the diversity of coverings of monsters, we have a huge variety of ways to skin a monster. So one weird way to cover a monster is to cover them with a crystal lattice, which can bend or refract light waves. This type of covering is found in many marine invertebrates, which cover their bodies in shells composed of two crystal types of calcium, carbon, and oxygen atoms arranged in different lattice structures. One crystal type is calcite, in which atoms are arranged in sheets to form the crystal structure, calcite. And calcite is a crystal that bends light or has high diffraction. As you can see in the weird way it projects the graph behind here it's sitting on. Now, calcite is a useful biological building material because it's very strong. So in trilobites that have compound eyes, they're composed this crystal structure, and they require kind of a unique way of focusing their eyes, their compound eyes, using some unique optics to be able to focus their eyes on things. The other crystal that invertebrates use is aragonite. Aragonite is used in mollusks, and aragonite has these very tall, conical crystals of the same elements, calcium, carbon, and oxygen, and they act like little prisms, which make iridescent shine in pearls and on the inside of shells. Although it's a weaker substance, it provides a hidden beauty to many mollusks, like ammonites, and color to snail shells. Among vertebrates, skin texture is really, really diverse, with fur, feathers, spines, quills, and scutes. Skin can be rough, or it can be smooth. And one interesting aspect of skin in vertebrates is that it forms from the outer ectodermal layer, which is also important in the formation of some of the bones in the body, including the skull. Hence, many animals retain the ability to grow bone, or even what this is dentine. So dentine is a tough enamel-like substance within the skin to provide armor to the animal. So in sharks, which this is the skin of sharks, dentine is formed along these hard scales. A similar armor scale is called ganoid, and it's found in primitive fish like alligator gars, which form a dense coat of these diamond-shaped scales across the body of the animal. Now in reptiles, osteoderms, which are these bone that's in the skin, are very common, and these are bony scutes which grow right within the skin, and they give the really rough texture of lizards and crocodiles. And osteoderms are common in many dinosaurs, as well as many reptile-like monsters like Godzilla. Now, quills of keratin sheaths are likely the precursor to feathers, which became fluffy near the origin of dinosaurs and pterosaurs, in a group called the Ornithidiera. Now, despite the growing evidence from science that dinosaurs were covered in feathers, sadly, the new Jurassic Park movies have incorrectly reconstructed dinosaurs without feathers. But quill protuberances along the ulna bone in the forearm of Velociraptor indicates they had feathers like a modern goose and may have used these to help protect their eggs or for capturing prey with long feathers off the forearms. And here we can see these little protuberances, and this is a goose ulna. And this is a reconstruction by my friend Mick Ellison. One of the most well-known feathered dinosaurs is the carnivorous dinosaur Microraptor, which ate birds, had bird bones in its stomach, and it has feathers extending from the arms and feet. This is a four-winged dinosaur. We remarkably know now the color of the feathers thanks to the study of the preserved tissue within the feathers. And they were iridescent black, much like a raven or a crow. And in fact, this may be why Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds is such a scary movie. And the fear of birds is actually a very common phobia. So how cool would Jurassic Park be today if the creators covered Velociraptor in black feathers, like a shrouded Grim Reaper? So this would, I think, would blow audiences away with a unique and more realistic depiction of dinosaurs. Bony spines, shells, and other protuberances are all open up for monster makers and other types of weird coverings. In mammals, we have the extinct glyptodons, which formed a shell made of hexagonal osteoderms that form a tough protective shell, while living pangolins have a network of keratin scales. This is the same material that forms our fingernails. Horns, which have bony cores, are covered in keratin and are found in many groups, including bovids, as well as the pronghorn antelope, as well as in ancient horned creatures like Uintatheres that I've been studying. So Uintatheres are mammals that lived here in Utah during the Eocene about 47 million years ago, and they exhibit long saber-toothed canines as well as horn cores along the skull. This is a skeleton that's on display at the Fieldhouse Museum in Vernal, and it's one of the most famous fossils from Utah. And I've been working, trying to find more material in prime Uintathere habitat in the Eocene rocks, both in Utah and in southwest Wyoming, trying to figure out who these guys are related to. Antlers that contain only the keratin are found in cervids or deer, such as moose and elk, which are shed each year and grown usually by males for the rut in the fall. Horns and antlers tend to be more common in herbivores, where they're used for protection. For example, this is likely the main purpose of large horns found in ceratopsian dinosaurs, to protect them from large carnivores. But they were probably also useful for species selection and sexual display, but a wide variety of horn shapes in groups of both ceratopsian dinosaurs and modern African bovids or antelope. Now, fur should not be forgotten as a covering for monsters, and who could forget Scully from Monsters, Inc. So fur can be short, or it can be really long, and it's often useful for creatures to add to monsters that live in very cold places. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about something called chimera, and that's basically the way in which monster makers make unique combinations. So monsters have a deep history within our collective memories. The oldest written story of fiction, the Epic of Gilgamesh, featured monsters like Humbaba. And the Greeks had a mythology of many wonderful monsters. Most of these monsters are chimera, which comes from the name of one of the monsters in Greek mythology, which is described as a lion with the head of a goat and a tail of a snake. Its siblings included the three-headed dog Cherubis and the multi-headed serpent Hydra. Chimera's mother was Echidna, the she-vapor, and was just half woman and half snake, and its father was Typhon, a snake-like monster with multiple heads. In mythology, the Greeks wrote about monsters by combining living animals in strange ways. For example, the snake-like hair of Medusa and the winged horse Pegasus. And this tradition extends even today, combining various animals into a single unique monster. In the art of Terrell Witchlatch, who helped create the creatures in the Star Wars movies, you may be familiar with some of her stuff, we see how she takes elements of various animals and combines them in unique ways to make strange but believable monsters. Another amazing monster maker is the work of Bren Matheny, who took the heads of sharks and placed them on house cats. Some of her creatures will hopefully be featured in this summer's movie, Valerina, the City of 1,000 Planets, which will be coming out in July. So in fact, most, if not all, monsters are chimera, the combination of traits that exist in the real world and combine to form new, unique creatures. Now, one of my favorite monster makers is Dougal Dixon, who imagined living creatures evolving into new creatures after the extinction of man, as well as a series of creatures imagining if dinosaurs never did go extinct. And as a kid, I was introduced to Dougal Dixon when I saw his traveling exhibit on future creatures in his After Man exhibit. And the idea of imagining how animals, including humans, will evolve in the future was the inspiration behind Olaf Stapleton's Last and First Men, a story of near and far future in which many weird and strange species of humans evolved. They eventually evolve into a sessile creature that lives on the oceans of Neptune. So when we add humans to the mix of animals, we venture towards monsters that are more frightening because they're a reflection of ourselves. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some human-like monsters and something called the Uncanny Valley. So primate-like monsters include Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, or Yeti, which may have originated from misidentifying bears in the same regions that the Yeti's been identified as. And there's a persistence of this myth, and it's perhaps due to the human-like or ape-like appearance giving them sort of the intelligence of humans. There is a fossil record of large orang-like primate called Egyptopithecus, which is the jaw there, that lived in the ancient bamboo forests of Asia. Although only known by teeth in this lower jaw, the creature is often cited by Bigfoot researchers, although we really don't know what it looked like. We just have a jaw and some teeth. Large apes have spawned a number of monsters. And of course, the gigantic gorillas give us King Kong. The furry little bug-eyed tarsiers, the basis of gremlins. And there's been no confirmed large primates in the fossil record other than modern humans in North America. There are some ancestors of tarsiers and lemurs, the Omomaid and Adapid primates, that can be found as fossils here in Utah during the Eocene. Now, one of the ways we can make ourselves more frightened is by understanding something called the Uncanny Valley. The Uncanny Valley is a concept that developed out of robotics. This is when a robot starts to get closer to being kind of more realistic in appearance to a real human. It kind of goes through this valley of becoming more and more creepy, but then it passes a threshold, and then all of a sudden it's less creepy as it gets closer to humans. And there's many theories on why this Uncanny Valley exists, but two theories seem to be the most popular. Why some human-like monsters can become very scary. The first idea is related to species identification. And that is that species kind of feel the sense of not necessarily identifying these creatures as our own species. And so there's this feeling of otherness. However, you can do some experiments that have shown that you can move animals or monsters out of this uncanny valley, like robots and animated things, by something called neoteny. And so basically, neoteny is a type of what's called heterochrony. This is where we apply baby-like or juvenile traits to an adult creature. So what we usually do, what animators will do, is they'll enlarge the eyes. So this is a chimpanzee. So this is a baby chimpanzee, big eyes compared to the head. This is an adult chimpanzee. So animators, like in Inside Out, will oftentimes enlarge the eyes. They will also make the chin smaller, smaller mouth, and give them sort of more sort of baby-like features. And this makes them less scary or creepy. Now you can do the same thing with babies to make them creepy. You can give them adult bodies, or you can give them like gigantic sizes. This is a wonderful art by Nia Levy. He does these really creepy things. So that's one way you can move something into or out of the Uncanny Valley. The second theory of the Uncanny Valley, I think, has a little bit more merit to it, and that is where we recognize death. So the sight of a dead body can evoke real and strong emotions because it alerts our brains to danger. Our minds are really good at discerning death, and the difference between a living person and someone who is dead. So robots, mannequins, statues can invoke a lot of fear because they are human in appearance, but they're acting like the dead. They don't move. They're not moving. Now, no other monster is perhaps as scary as death animated. And this is a new form of monster that's brought back to life by Mary Shelley in 1818, a novel, Frankenstein. Now, death animated is also behind the modern depiction of zombies. And originally, actually, zombies were part of the rich folklore of Haiti. And they became popular on the island during the years of slavery and the slave rebellion. The idea of zombies was the terrifying notion that someone had control of your body, even in death. Although the modern concept of zombie is often something just creepy, a creepy-looking corpse brought back to life. So to make good zombies, all you need to do is really study death. So I wanted to leave you tonight with some cool resources that you could take advantage of. And I have some handouts if you guys are interested in some of these URLs to some of these websites to illustrate. So if you're interested in some of the stuff I do, you can check out my YouTube channel, which is just Benjamin Berger Science. I have hundreds and hundreds of videos up there, adding more every day, about paleontology, invert paleontology, vert paleontology, fossil mammals, all sorts of stuff. If you're interested in drawing monsters, a really cool websites to check out are the work of Teriel Witschlach. And she has a number of really good online resources for drawing imaginary creatures, including some lectures on drawing monsters, gallery for artwork, and she has some online sort of education stuff on creature design. Bren Mathedy has some wonderful stuff as well on drawing creatures. She has a wonderful workshop on drawing digital creatures using Photoshop, if you guys are interested in that. Another person I love, I didn't feature any of his work tonight, but he's an amazing artist, is James Gurney. He's the artist behind the Dinotopia series, if you guys are interested in that. And he has tons and tons and tons of resources. If you're into like traditional art, he does a lot of watercolor work. He does gouache and all sorts of stuff. And he has a couple books out on using the fantasy and bringing that into the real world. Some really cool workshops and stuff that he has available. Another person I just recently discovered is Richard Stevens. He's a Norwegian monster maker. He makes these amazing monsters in his free time. And his YouTube channel you should definitely check out. His Patreon is Lone Animator. He does a lot of stuff inspired by H.P. Lovecraft monsters. Really cool stuff. Also, you should check out Adam Savage and Jamie Hyman, these guys behind the Mythbusters. They have a wonderful website called tested.com. And there's some good workshops or like little demo stuff, particularly on, you guys are into 3D printing. There's also wonderful cast and molding exercises done by an old colleague of mine, Frank Ipio, that's on there. And then it's a really good site for learning how to paint monsters as well to check out. And then the last kind of site you should check out is the Stan Wilston School of Character Arts. They're kind of the professional level classes. They have some amazing resources available, as well as some free online workshops and stuff that you can check out also on their YouTube channel. And it's some great stuff for beginning monster makers. All right, so I want to give you guys a big pep talk to go out and make some really cool monsters. So, and I'm open for any questions you guys have. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, wouldn't like one of the most scary things would be like a robot that looks like a human, but like you just tell us not?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the scariest things you can do is make, creatures that are robots but not humans. And it's actually really creepy. They've done experiments where they take a person's face and they can morph it and get it into the Uncanny Valley where it looks really creepy, and then they can move it out of that. Now, this is a big problem if you're an artist. Say you're a portrait artist. You're trying to paint someone's face. You don't want to paint them and make them look scary, right? So you're always worried. So a lot of times animators will make eyes slightly bigger than the real person, or you see all the Pixar animated movies, they make the eyes really big, and that's to prevent these people that go into the uncanny. They don't want them to be creepy because then people won't be too scared to go see these movies. Some of the very first animations that Pixar did, they ran into this problem. People thought the funny little characters were too scary, so they make the eyes really, really big. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, so the question was, why do herbivores have big canines? So one of the reasons that herbivores, actually some of the biggest canines that exist are like in pigs. There's some pigs that have really big canines. They're so big they go back and grow back into their skull. Musk deer, which have big canines, they're used to impress mates, so they look sexy. So that's one of the reasons they have a lot of actually herbivores will have big long fangs and stuff to kind of look impressive. So, there's a question back here. Oh, there's a question way back there. Go ahead.
This is kind of a personal question.
Uh-huh.
Would you prefer CGI monsters or animatronic monsters?
I love the stop action sort of things, and I'll tell you why. If you ever, so Lake Placid, the reason it's so bad is the lighting's wrong. So before I came to Utah, I worked at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and I worked with artists that would do like exhibit stuff. And one of the things that they would do that blew my mind, I didn't realize this, was that they would take like a dinosaur, for example, and they would sculpt the dinosaur and make this beautiful sculpture of a dinosaur. They would put feathers on it meticulously. They'd spend like weeks, months, building this model. And then they would light it, maybe put little trees and bushes around it, light it, take a picture, and then from that picture they would draw it. And the drawing would be the publication. And no one would ever see this like amazing model that they produced. And the reason that they did it was lighting. So one of the biggest problems you have in doing CGI is getting good lighting. So when you do that, you know exactly where the light is hitting stuff. And so you'll notice like James Gurney has a really wonderful little lesson that he does. He goes out, he just like takes like a dinosaur, like he has an example of a flying car. He puts like a little matchbox car, like a little car he has, he puts it on his like little easel. He goes out and he starts painting a scene, and he paints the flying car in the sky, because he knows the light is the same. And it looks, you look at the painting, and you're like, oh, they painted a flying car. So a lot of monster makers will actually go and they'll make the monster, and then they'll get the lighting set up. It's all about the lighting. So sometimes that looks really good, but I've seen amazing CGI where the lighting is just spot on too. Yeah, so, yeah.
Given the theory of the Uncanny Valley, can you do the exact opposite, making eyes smaller?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So the question is, can you move in and out of the Uncanny Valley by like making the eyes really small? And you can. So one of the things you can do is make a mouth really big. I don't know if you've seen makeup artists that are doing the kind of the cool thing where they're doing people's necks and making that a mouth. It's really creepy looking. And part of that is because you're expanding the mouth and jaw, and that's pushing it into the Uncanny Valley. So small eyes. scary, sharp teeth, big mouths, little heads on big bodies makes things much more scarier. And then you can do the opposite. You can make, big head. Look at Charlie Brown. He has giant heads. You can't even reach over his head. He's so big, but it doesn't look scary. So cartoonists have known about this, big eyes, big heads. And you could do the same, like you could take a baby, of course, and put, adult bodies or, grown man arms on a baby, and it just looks really weird. Yeah, another question down here?
What kind of teeth do you think Cthulhu has? It's been driving me crazy for years.
Oh,
Maybe a beak?
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about, so the question was, Cthulhu, the H.P. Lovecraft, I was going to talk a lot about H.P. Lovecraft. He actually talks about Uintahs and the Mountains of Madness, the Antarctic expedition, which is, if you read it from a paleontology point of view, he uses a lot of real science, which is really cool. So in some creatures, well, in cephalopods, they have a beak that actually can close and pull in food. So it probably has something like that. But, I mean, you could put any sort of mouth on it.
Do you think the wings are vestigial?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. All right.
All right, let's thank Ben one more time, and we'll see you in the hallway.